Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm your host Kaitlin Belknap, Move to Amends National Director, and you're here tuning in to our monthly live report, which we always do on the last Wednesday of every month here on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, except for when we do it on a different day, but for the most part it's on the last Wednesday of the month. Move to Amend is the campaign to pass the We the People Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to make clear that corporations don't have constitutional rights and to get big money out of politics. I'm coming to you today from San Jose, California, where it's pretty smoky and has been that way for the last week. Today we have a bunch of news and updates, so stay put, don't go anywhere. Share or retweet this live stream using the hashtag #MoveToAmend and hashtag live report for a chance to win a free t-shirt at the end of the report. We always give out prizes. This month we're doing our t-shirts again at the end of the show, so you can win by helping us spread the word, retweeting this live feed with the hashtag #MoveToAmend if you're on Twitter, and share this live feed with the hashtag #MoveToAmend on Facebook. Also feel free to tag your friends, and I'll pick one lucky winner from each platform, Facebook and Twitter, but you can also find us on YouTube. And feel free to ask me your questions anytime. I'll answer them at the end. And even if you're not tuning in live, you can ask us questions. We'll be sure to reply in chat as soon as we can. So first up is corporate rule news from August. These pandemic months are so crazy. Some of them fly by. August seemed like it was going by really quickly, but then the last week here in California with the fires has just been long. So it's coming to an end and things aren't getting any better. Much of the West is on fire here in California. Almost 120,000 people have had to evacuate from their homes. Firefighters are struggling to get a handle on 560 wildfires that are burning throughout our state, scorching almost 1 million acres, including a treasured redwood forest, although it looks like the redwood trees are going to be okay, but the site not so much. And this is only the beginning of fire season. The fires are continuing to grow, particularly in the northern part of the state, which is where I am. And there's two kind of groupings of fires that are among the largest in our state's history. The smoke is so bad that it's already reached Nebraska, where folks can smell it. And it's really, really pretty bad here in the larger Bay Area and surrounding area. So, and then on top of that, in the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricane Laura is gaining strength and expected to crash into the already impacted Louisiana and Texas coasts as Category 4 hurricane this evening. Louisiana was hit by a Category 1 hurricane, Marco, just this past weekend. So I'm wishing everyone the best and hope you and your families and your homes are safe. In terms of COVID, even though clearly it's human nature to try and move on, and the powers that be are really trying to convince us that everything is fine and that it's okay if we move on, we're actually still very much in the middle of this pandemic. The United States has 5.7 million confirmed cases and 178,000 deaths as of, I think that's yesterday. And the cases with the most, or the states with the most cases are California, Florida, Texas, New York, and Georgia. So pretty wildly different populations there. The states with the most deaths are New York, New Jersey, California, Texas, and Florida. And these numbers are before we really have the numbers of what the cases are as a result of people going back to school and classes resuming, which obviously the White House and Trump have been pushing, as well as a number of people in government. And that's assuming that we hear the statistics accurately. Some schools are keeping quiet about coronavirus infections. Alfonso's going to share an article about that but some examples. On the first day of school in Camden County, Georgia, local Facebook groups were already buzzing with rumors that a teacher had tested positive for the coronavirus. The next day, a warning went out to school administrators that teachers need to keep quiet about it. In the weeks since, parents, students, and teachers in the coastal community on the Florida border have heard by word of mouth of more positive cases linked to the school district, but not officially. And even as fears of an outbreak have grown, the district has refused to publicly confirm a single case, either to the local community or the New York Times, who covered this story. And they're not going to be able to keep this for a secret much longer. More and more U.S. colleges are grappling with high numbers of students testing positive for coronavirus just days into the start of their fall semesters, after some universities rolled back their campus reopening plans in recent weeks. It's just nuts that educational institutions are endangering their students' health for the tuition money. And as per usual, greed is the root of that instead of the public safety. And if you don't believe me, just read what the CDC has on their website. Quote, reopening schools creates an opportunity to invest in the education, well-being, and future of America's greatest assets, our children. So it's sickening how in the midst of this basically apocalyptic situation, profits are still the priority in this country. And on top of these natural disasters and COVID, unforeseen catastrophes, we have to worry about the constant blows to our already defunded public institutions, which are taking it really hard, in particular the U.S. Postal Service and now the American retirement system. So on the post office situation, hopefully you already know about this, but just to kind of recap, longtime Republican mega donor and Trump allied Postmaster General Louis DeJoy is being criticized for maintaining financial ties to a company that conducts business with the U.S. Postal Service. He received $1.2 million to $7 million in income from XPO Logistics last year, which should be a major conflict of interest. And on top of that, since he started the job on June 15th, DeJoy has launched an unprecedented and solely political series of organizational shakeups that have attracted bipartisan criticism. The changes would delay mail delivery just as more Americans are expected to vote by mail. And on top of that, we are seeing, holiday levels of volume because more people are having to have their goods mailed to them because of COVID. And this could all potentially heavily influence the upcoming national election. These changes include a reduction in employee overtime hours and the elimination of postal sorting machines. I'm sure you've seen the stories of postal machines that are like disappearing in the night or being decommissioned even though they were in full use and taken away. Luckily, after seeing how 8 of their 18 machines that sort and postmark letters were disconnected and pushed into a corner, USPS workers defied orders and reinstalled the machines in Seattle, Tacoma, as well as reinstalled others in Wenatchee and in Dallas, and that's happening in more places. So direct action and salute to postal workers defying orders and potentially the law and threats to their jobs in the interests of public good. The House on Saturday went into session in a pretty unprecedented move, coming back from recess and passing a bill that had bipartisan support to allocate $25 billion to the USPS and to ban these operational changes. However, the House alone can't make it happen. On Tuesday, yesterday, thousands of people took action across the United States with one clear message: save the post office. The fight isn't over yet. It's really important for all of us to contact our senators at this point, and also to push support for the post office and make sure that it is not gutted, as we are seeing the federal government attempting to do. And then on top of that, Wall Street is in the process of swooping in to loot the American retirement system. And of course, the Trump administration is helping. So the Trump administration is pushing dramatic changes to the American retirement system that will benefit Wall Street, but push average citizens into plans that are riskier, less profitable, and loaded with high and hidden fees. In the past 2 months, Trump's Labor Department has introduced 2 pending changes to deregulate vultuous private equity firms and multi-trillion-dollar retirement managers like Vanguard, Fidelity, and BlackRock. A third proposed change would restrict retirement investments with an underlying environmental, social, or governance mission, mainly to boost the struggling fossil fuel industry. If realized, the results of these suggested changes will be death by 1,000 cuts to the Americans' already diminished retirement nest egg, amounting to an all-out Wall Street looting of the American retirement system. And pushing this through is Secretary of Labor Eugene Scalia, son of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And for the millennials and Zoomers out there, maybe just a quick review of the basics of retirement is helpful. I know that even I, as a Gen X millennial straddler, have always been sort of skeptical whether retirement will be a thing by the time I get to that age. But retirement refers to a period toward the end of our lives, which in theory, ordinary people could use the money that we've saved and invested, combined with our Social Security payments over the course of our working lives, to stop working, but still live comfortably and with dignity and not die in the gutter. These used to be considered a core part of the American middle class reality, especially for white folks. But thanks to Wall Street and corporate rule and having absolutely nothing to do with avocado toast, retirement as a concept has become more of a pipe dream than a guarantee. That American dream, like that supposed sensation of safety that we're supposed to feel when we see a cop on the street, is long dead. And honestly, maybe that's fitting, because for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people, the American dream has mostly been a myth the whole time. Which takes us to this week. Another innocent Black man was shot by the police. Jacob Blake was shot multiple times at close range by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin last weekend. Miraculously, he is alive, but he is paralyzed from the waist down, according to their family's attorney. He was breaking up a fight between 2 women, not involved in any incident, and was walking away as the police arrived, and they shot him in the back. The whole thing was filmed. Millions of people saw that video. I can't say that I did, and I want to just offer a suggestion that we don't need to actually witness and see and share, especially callously in sort of like an attempt to kind of create a gasp-inducing situation, these images of Black folks and violence against them. It's incredibly triggering for people who have had to deal with that, and we should potentially be a lot more careful there, although it is so critical at the same time that these images are actually seen, and that white Americans are finally understanding what the reality has been for Black folks in this country. So the whole thing was filmed. Jacob Blake was unarmed. His children were in the car, and he didn't do anything wrong. And even if he had, it's absolutely not grounds for an attempted execution, which is what the police did. So Kenosha is understandably in flames, and I'm sure most of the folks tuning in now have already seen that last night a 17-year-old white supremacist and police sympathizer shot 3 people, killing 2. He was there with armed militia who have the desire to incite a civil war over race, racial tension, racial violence. And so solidarity actions are happening across the country. And it's really critical that we not stand aside in this moment. And we have to continue to occupy the streets and whole cities if needed, because enough is enough. And we're not going to back down despite threats like taking away our right to vote. So to shift gears a little bit, backtrack a couple days, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee quietly signed a bill into law ramping up punishments for certain kinds of protests, including punishment of losing the right to vote, and felony punishment for folks who are protesting in support of Black lives. The GOP-controlled state assembly in Tennessee passed the measure last week during a 3-day special legislative session, and the governor signed it without an announcement earlier this week. The new law slaps a mandatory 45-day sentence for aggravated rioting, boosts the fine for blocking highway access to emergency vehicles, and enhances the punishment for aggravated assault against a first responder to a Class C felony. Remember that when people are charged with crimes like the ones that I went through, that all might sound like, well, those are reasonable things to hold people accountable for. But oftentimes when people are charged with those crimes, it is police officers' word against theirs. It's not even necessarily something that people do. It's a charge that you have, and then you have to prove that you didn't do it, and they love to be able to throw the book at people. They are certainly trying to make an example, and other states will probably be following suit, trying to up the ante and discourage us from getting in the streets and saying enough is enough over police brutality and white supremacy in this country, because they don't want to see us move in a different direction. The bill was passed. The bill passed the General Assembly after almost 2 months of sustained protests outside the state capitol in Tennessee, where demonstrators have been calling for racial justice reforms in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing by Minneapolis police in May. It is a clear attempt to intimidate us. And like all social movements through history, fear and intimidation only goes so far as we let it. Speaking of relentless efforts, again, kind of switching gears here a little bit, courage and sacrifice. One of the movements that we can take inspiration from is the women's rights movement, and want to acknowledge that this month was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment being ratified. But despite the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the fight for women's equality still continues. And also, on one hand, while we can take inspiration from their sacrifice, and there was a lot of it years in front of the White House in, cold, rain, prison, forced feedings, direct action was absolutely necessary to get that amendment passed. And on one hand, all of that was incredibly brave and incredibly critical. On the other hand, there are some cautionary lessons that we need to consider when we look at that movement. The fight was compromised from its inception by a largely racist vision on the part of many suffrage leaders, of who should benefit and who could be left out. White suffragists were the ones who really actually gained the vote from the 19th Amendment, and women of color, depending on which race we're talking about, didn't gain that right to vote until, some years, and in some cases, many, many, many years later. And that was not the agenda on the part of the white suffrage leaders whose names we may know, was not one of racial equality for the most part. And this is often left out of the history books. And speaking of voting, remember that many Americans still do not enjoy full voting rights. Despite the Voting Rights Act, voter suppression efforts persist and disproportionately affect voters of color, immigrant voters, LGBTQ voters, young voters, and disabled voters. And as a result, many women living at the intersection of these identities cannot actually exercise their ability to vote. Access to the vote is a powerful tool to drive change and transform communities, and that's why people like Governor Lee in Tennessee know that, and why they want to strip us of that right. They're going to try and use all of the tools they can to drive against us as we fight for change. They're coming up on our, trying to attack our right to vote. They're suppressing news and distributing misinformation on social media, and gutting the post office is the latest. But we can't We can't allow them to get away with this. Speaking again to the post office, we should all aspire to be as badass as the USPIS, something that I didn't know about, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. The USPI is the gun-carrying, badge-bearing law enforcement arm of the United States Postal Service. It consists of roughly 1,200 agents that defend the nation's mail system from illegal or dangerous use. And they even had a TV show called The Inspectors about them. And the U.S. attorney himself gave the USPIS agents a shout out after the arrest of Steve Bannon, former Trump's chief of staff and extreme troll. As it turns out, it was the USPIS who carried out the arrest of Bannon last Thursday. Bannon and Brian Kolfage, founders of the We Build the Wall fundraiser, were indicted Thursday morning on conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Trump has tried to distance himself from the scandal by saying he didn't like the project and he thought it was being done for, quote, showboating reasons, which is weird because Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach and the general counsel of the We Build the Wall in January 2019 said that Trump gave the project his blessing, as well as Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., gave it public praise of the project, saying that it was, quote, pretty amazing effort for a, quote, important grassroots issue at a 2018 fundraiser, according to a video unearthed by CNN's Andrew Kaczynski. So that's all the bad news that we've got going on in a nutshell. There's obviously a lot more nuance to it, but we try to hit the highlights of what it is, things that we think that folks should be aware of, living in this system of corporate rule as we do now. You're listening to Move to Amend's monthly live report. I'm Kaitlin Svosi-Belknap, Move to Amend's national director. Move to Amend is the campaign to pass the We the People Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to make clear that corporations don't have constitutional rights and to get big money out of politics. And you can ask me your questions anytime. I will answer them at the end. Don't forget that we'll be giving away a t-shirt to a Facebook listener and a Twitter listener for helping us spread the word. Retweet or share the link to this live stream using the hashtag #MoveToAmend and hashtag live report. And we will pick one person from each platform and send you a t-shirt for helping us spread the word. Thanks for being here with me. Next up is updates from the Move to Amend campaign. Okay, I almost dropped my computer on the ground. I'm in a little bit of a precarious situation. I won't share which room in the house I'm in, but it's kind of funny. Okay, campaign updates. So August was a little bit funky because the Senate didn't go on recess for like a week and a half into August, and then the House came back early. But August we always call We the People Lobby Month, because when the Congress members and senators are home, that is the best chance to get them in person to do citizen lobbying and urge them, push them, cajole them, threaten them to support the We the People Amendment. And the weird thing, though, about this year, of course, is that those meetings cannot happen in person. And so there were some virtual meetings. We'll be able to report on those later and see if any of, if we gained any new co-sponsors as a result of those. But the reality is that the recess time really isn't as much of an opportunity in the age of COVID as it might be. We could have these Zoom meetings or virtual meetings with our reps anytime. So if you didn't get a chance to lobby your rep, no problem, because there's more opportunities on the way. September is still a great time to try and have one of those meetings. So Alfonso's going to share our link, movetoamend.org/lobby, where you can see the recording of the webinar that I did at the end of July to help get us ready for We the People Lobby Month. And all the information still applies, and you can still sign up. We'd be happy to help you set up that meeting. All the materials that you need are on our page, on our site. But we could even join you for that meeting, even if we don't live in your state, or we can also connect you with others from your community or your congressional district or your state if you're going after your senator. So the first thing you would want to do is check and make sure to see if your representative is already a co-sponsor or not, if you don't already know, and then go from there. So check out the page on our site. This is really important. This is the best way to educate your Congress members about the need for this amendment. And the reality is, I mean, that corporate rule news that I ran through, almost every single one of those issues would be vastly different if corporations didn't have constitutional rights and if money wasn't speech and we didn't have campaign spending by billionaires and corporations in our elections. And so this amendment is the fundamental linchpin underneath almost everything else that we are trying to do or propping up the system of corporate rule. And it's so critical that we have your grassroots help and support to push our representatives and to educate people about why we need this amendment. So I invite you all right now to plug in, and lobbying your rep is a great way to get started. There's also a number of other ways to connect with Move to Amend. I will talk about some of them here in just a second if lobbying isn't your cup of tea, but getting used to the practice of pressuring your representative to do what their constituents need is something that all of us need, right? So speaking of the amendment, we have 74 co-sponsors in the House. And we're just one away from our 2020 goal of 75. Obviously, this is a bizarre year, and we don't know what will come of it. The fact of the matter is, working on a systemic, kind of longer-term issue in the middle of all of these crises, as well as a national election year, means that people are like a wee bit distracted from these systemic issues. So if you're one of the people who understands how fundamental this is to all the rest of this house of cards, I ask you to please, put in some time, also some of your resources, any extra that you have in terms of like donation support, but becoming a volunteer with Move to Amend is really key. So we don't, in the past years, we've actually been able to surpass our goal every single year since we started setting them and having our amendment introduced in Congress in terms of the number of co-sponsors. So 2020, we might just make it, but I definitely don't want us to go to the end of the year without at least getting to that 75. So let's get your rep on board or get the conversation started with them. And in some cases, it does take, multiple meetings, and worst case scenario, sometimes it takes like a couple of years to bring these folks along. But the reality is that we have been able to pressure people successfully who initially told us no, or didn't understand the issue, or were unwilling to pay attention to this. And the way that we were always able to do it is by that grassroots pressuring. And so please help us get to that 75, if not beyond. One of the things that we do to kind of plant the seed early on is take advantage of when folks are running for office for either the very first time or when they're running for re-election. And obviously 2020, this is one of the most important elections in maybe the history of our country, certainly, in my lifetime. And on one hand, I personally just hate how elections are such a distraction from the real work in a way. At the same time, like, this is a really critical election year. So every single member of the House of Representatives is up for election in a federal election year, and a good number of senators, as well as people running for state and local office as well. So our Pledge to Amend campaign is a campaign to target people running for office, whether they're incumbents or challengers, to make clear that they will use their office to support the We the People amendment and Move to Amend in this movement. So if you go to our website, movetoamend.org/pledge, and Alfonso will share the links for this. You can see if candidates running for office in your community or your congressional district have taken the pledge yet, and you can also see where you can ask candidates to do that. You can share either a paper pledge, going to events, less of those now in this day and age, so emailing them, contacting them on social media, asking them publicly if they're having like Zoom town halls or debates, things like that, asking their position on the We the People amendment and if they will take the pledge to amend. This is so important. So many of our representatives who are currently co-sponsors in Congress now came to us because they first took the pledge while they were running for election. The reality is that, candidates are more inclined to pay attention to what we think and what we want from them when they're running for office. And so this is the prime time to ask them. And obviously we address them through, grassroots citizen lobbying when they're in office, but getting them when they're running for office and they're looking for votes is a really key time, and then holding them to that, obviously. So for example, our, lead, Pramila Jayapal from Washington State started working with us initially when she was in the state legislature, taking our pledge to amend. And then we passed a ballot initiative in the state of Washington and further helped, educate her and other leaders in the state. And then when she was elected to Congress, she took the pledge, officially again as a congressional candidate, came on as a co-sponsor, and then when we needed a new lead because our original lead retired, she stepped forward and said, I've already made a commitment to this. I would like to champion this bill. So that's sort of like the picture perfect way of why pledge to amend really matters. And it also ties in why it's so important that we also target people running for state office as well as municipal and local office, because those people are the ones who are most likely to run for higher office. Like in the case of Congresswoman Jayapal, she started in her state legislature, as so many Congress members do. And oftentimes those folks actually start in municipal government and, working at the city level and running for office there for the very first time. And so asking these folks early on in their careers, educating them early on to understand why corporate personhood is such a detriment to democracy, why money in politics is something that they actively need to fight against, and why this amendment is the fundamental, systemic solution to both of those two issues. And remember that, the way to pass a constitutional amendment is to, one way, the way that we're currently focusing on, is to get both houses of Congress to pass it, and then it has to go to the states for ratification. So that's why, not just with an eye to the future, but in terms of maybe they'll run for office in higher office later, but we're going to need state legislators to be committed to this amendment because they're going to be critical for its passage when it comes time for ratification. So all of that is why pledge to amend is really important, and we need you to also help us. So if you are a candidate running for office, if you are working on a candidate's campaign, if you are a donor to a candidate, tell that candidate that you want to see them take the pledge to amend. This is also the really important way for us to help voters know which candidates for office are going to champion the Move to Amend movement and which ones are not. So the pledge actually allows them to say yes or no to the questions. And so some people say no, and that's an important piece of information for voters to know. So making sure to get as many candidates as possible to take the pledge, and then also to help us share the results with your fellow voters so that they can make an informed decision. And sometimes you might be surprised at the people who are willing to stand up and say that they do support the amendment, not necessarily breaking along the party lines that you would assume. And then also sometimes folks who are not willing to take the pledge that you would think would, because they might have some good rhetoric about money in politics, but when it comes down to it, they're actually not willing to challenge corporate constitutional rights in the fundamental way that we need to and pass the We the People amendment. So all of that is why you should check out Pledge to Amend. And then also something that we've been doing this summer, and we're going to continue on into the fall, is a Friday show where we go live every Friday at noon Pacific, and my colleagues, and sometimes me, but really all of us at Move to Amend are kind of rotating and sharing around two people to join you and kind of give a rundown, making sense of the week in these crazy, crazy times, and then answering your questions and talking about whatever you want to talk about. So tune in with us. You can do that on our social media pages and our YouTube, and get a sense of some of the other awesome and important folks who work with Move to Amend. We really have a stellar crew, and I'm really glad we're doing this Making Sense so that you get a chance to know more people than just me. And then a couple just kind of announcements, things we want to make sure you know about. Move to Amend, when there is not a global pandemic happening, travels the country doing what we call barnstorming tours. We educate, inspire action, and identify local organizers to start Move to Amend groups. And we connect with other social change groups working at the grassroots level, because Move to Amend is a grassroots-based movement. And so we're not able to do those events in person, obviously, but we are still available virtually. So we have done a number of presentations to a targeted community, whether that's, a geographic community or an organization's membership. And we would be happy to join you or a group you work with or fellow members of your community to connect the We the People Amendment to maybe other issues you're working on, like maybe climate change or police brutality or anything. Almost everything connects to corporate rule. Or if you'd like to get a Move to Amend group started in your community, we would love to work with you and connect you with other folks who have already signed the Move to Amend petition where you live, in your congressional district or in your town, and then reach out to new ones as well. So if you'd like to nominate your community or your group for a barnstorming stop, email us at barnstorming@movetoamend.org. And I also want to let everybody know about a super cool and ongoing educational program that we originally developed. It's called the Movement Education Program. We originally developed it for our grassroots leaders in terms of internal training. It's movement history, some basic framework around privilege and oppression, and how to work together when we come from very different backgrounds, and the skills needed to be able to build trust, and then also the historical understanding to kind of get both what past movements can teach us, but also the kind of layers of the onion that need to be ripped into to kind of figure out where we are and how we got into this mess, because it's not about Citizens United, and it's not about stuff, it's not about Trump, it's not about things that have just happened in the last couple of years, unfortunately, even though we have all kinds of pressures to reduce it down to one or the other of those two things, but that's really not where it's at. So if you want to kind of peel back that onion and then also think about this in terms of your ability to effectively work across racial differences or age differences or gender differences, I encourage you to check out the Move to Amend education program. And perhaps it would be something that would be useful to your group, or something that you want to do as a study group with your friends, or something that you could just do yourself. So we're working with a new group called Radical Guide, which has awesome courses and trainings to be the platform for our movement education program, to make it more accessible than what we were doing before, where it's just kind of like an in-house thing. And obviously we couldn't need this more than we do right now, as our country is on the brink of civil war over racism and trying to hold on to white supremacy. So I encourage you to check out the Move to Amend education program, and also know that that is an evolving tool that we are constantly updating and working and getting feedback on. And it's something that we, borrowed from a number of our friends and comrades and folks that we look up to as well. So it's just a great repository for some really awesome and important analysis. You're listening to the Move to Amend Monthly Live Report. I'm Kaitlin Belknap, Move to Amend's National Director. Move to Amend is the campaign to pass the We the People Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to make clear that corporations don't have constitutional rights and to get big money out of politics. And you can ask me your questions anytime, whether you're tuning in live or not. And don't forget to help us share this broadcast and bring in more people using the hashtag #MoveToAmend. And we'll give a t-shirt to somebody from Twitter and somebody from Facebook who help us do that at the end of the show. Next up is our dispatch from the Grassroots. Normally, or not normally, but recently normally, this part of this show has been shared by our Grassroots director, Keyan Bliss, who this is kind of his domain, but he is not with us live today because he is doing local action trainings in Sacramento around the movement for Black Lives. So I'll be covering for him. And my thing is frozen here. Okay. Shout out to Santa Clara, California, Move to Amend, doing a great job securing organizational support for the We the People Amendment, with the Green Party of Santa Clara County voting to support HJR 48, and then unanimous support from the South Bay Indigenous Solidarity Organization as the latest additions to support the work that they've been doing. The group is coming off of a successful barnstorming event with our outreach director, Greg, and now are helping their fellow California Move to Amend leaders in the East Bay to secure support from former presidential candidate, House Representative Eric Swalwell, who is dragging his feet about endorsing this amendment. And if you live in the Bay Area, please help us reach him. He has some fundamental misunderstandings about corporate constitutional rights and needs to feel pressure from his constituents. So thanks to Santa Clara for aiding and supporting our folks in the East Bay. We the People Miami County, Ohio is one of our amendment working groups, and they'll be hosting our program director, Jessica, and several local speakers for a virtual barnstorming event tomorrow in the evening. They continue to press hard on their House Rep Warren Davidson, who is a Republican, to support HJR 48. They're also working to pass a local resolution with their city council in Troy, Ohio. So keep up the great work, Miami County folks. Sacramento, California, Move to Amend, which is where I live, but not where I am right now, and haven't been there for a minute. Good work to the folks in Sacramento for a successful film screening of the documentary 13th in the wake of the national uprisings following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor by police. This was a really timely screening that highlights how corporations have long exploited the 13th Amendment, law enforcement, and political institutions to enact racist policies that has led to the mass incarceration of millions of Black, Latino, and Indigenous people of color for no other reason than for profit. Sacramento continues to grapple with that impact even during COVID-19, as its county leadership has recently exposed that they have given up to 85% of emergency cares funding for the city to the local sheriffs and probations departments, while barely 2% has been given to the public health division. So keep up the pressure, Sacramento, Move to Amend. So that's it for the campaign updates, but I'm here to answer any questions that have come in along the way that you might have. And don't forget to stay tuned to the end to see if you're one of our t-shirt winners. While I'm waiting to see if Alfonso has flagged any questions for me, I haven't been able to look at the chat while we've been going, just so you know. I want to make sure to, again, ask everyone out there to support Move to Amend with your financial contributions and your time. If you can donate any support to us, it is so critical, so important. And, you know, like other grassroots groups, Move to Amend is not rolling in cash right now, right? We're operating, you know, at the margins. and trying to maximize, every dollar that we get. So thank you to all of you who are continuing to support us, especially to our sustainers, our monthly donors. Your support is so critical and so important. And we couldn't do this without you. And we would go under if you weren't continuing to support us. And we can't see that happen, right? We can't let that happen. So if you could make a donation to Move to Amend right now. And if you're not yet a monthly donor, I give $28 a month for the 28th Amendment. I suggest you start there. But if that's more than you can do, we're happy with 5 or 10, whatever amount. Move to Amend is funded by Grassroots folks, and we are powered by Grassroots folks. And so every little bit adds up. And I have not come across a national organization that stretches $1 more than Move to Amend. So even though we have, a national breadth that we cover and we do it really well, we frankly are, able to do that with the budget of what you would consider to be more of a grassroots local group or maybe state group. And we're proud of our ability to do that, and we will continue to. But your support makes all the difference. So if you could make a donation, if you support what we're doing, we'd really appreciate it. Looks like there's a couple other questions. So Roberto, great to have you here. I just want to acknowledge some of these. Shout out Seville. How does Sacramento explain this ridiculous spending discrepancy? Yeah, they haven't really done a very good job of that. I know that one of our superstars, Keyan, has been diligently working to call to account the county for this ridiculous and outrageous misuse of funds, and that's underway as we speak and developing. So we'll continue to put our attention to that as it's appropriate. And many of our members are doing that with their own time as well, because it's absolutely outrageous, but it also sadly is so typical for how Sacramento operates and what Sacramento prioritizes. And then I wanted to get to your question, Ken. Does Move to Amend complement public campaign financing? Absolutely. That is not officially a policy that Move to Amend has officially supported, although there are many of us who personally support public funding of campaigns. I mean, we fund the public infrastructure of our transportation system, for example. We absolutely should fund the public infrastructure of our election system. So not only is Move to Amend's amendment complementary, the reality is that potentially without this amendment, we will never be able to meaningfully move forward on implementing policies of campaign financing, because the Supreme Court has repeatedly struck down portions of campaign finance legislation that have attempted to kind of move towards public funding because of this idea that money is speech and that donors have a constitutional right to contribute their private money to elections. That's the current interpretation by the Supreme Court. And so that's why the second part of our amendment that says money is not speech, not protected by the First Amendment, is so fundamental and so important. And then the first part of our amendment says that corporations, or says that only human beings have constitutional rights. So those two pieces together are what's necessary to lay the foundation upon which we could pass publicly funded elections at the federal, state, or local level. And until we do that, any legislation that we do pass trying to move public funding forward is vulnerable to being overturned or gutted by the Supreme Court under their idea that people's personal money is protected by the Constitution and their spending is more important than the public's ability to access the political process, which is what public funding of elections would allow. Bob asked, do we really know how corporate personhood got started? A book on the subject that enjoys consensus. First time here. How do I save the chat? So the chat will be available. It looks like you're on YouTube. So the chat is in the comments on YouTube. So you can always come back to it. And we have some awesome resources on our website. We absolutely do know where corporate constitutional rights came from. The reality is that there's like a simple story and then there's a more complicated story. So the sort of simple story, I'll start there, and then direct you. A really great book on this is Unequal Protection by Tom Hartman. And there are some other good resources as well that under Learn More on our website you can find. So there's some books, and we have a whole bunch of articles that kind of go through all of this. Our Law and Research Committee has actually this year put together some really easy to absorb and digest for lay people, but still legally rigorous articles to kind of help really explain corporate constitutional rights, and in particular, why this is not just a money and politics issue. And if we try to reduce it down to just addressing the First Amendment rights of corporations, we're missing like a huge part of the problem. So the simple story is that as people, we're able to fight and drive ourselves into the Constitution through the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment. Corporate, the ruling elite, who were the owners of corporations, in particular railroad corporations, who were kind of like the, uber wealthy at the time of the turn of the century and the robber baron era, they worked to make the argument in the Supreme Court that these laws that treated corporations differently than people for the purposes of taxing them higher and holding them accountable, because as Screen Arts Media just said, a corporation is property. And so really it's a tool for concentrating property. But the thing is, when you concentrate property and wealth, you're also potentially concentrating power. And so even though there was a whole hell of a lot wrong with the foundation of this country that we're still trying to deal with and unravel today in terms of colonialism and slavery and genocide, in terms of corporations, there was a proper understanding that corporations were subordinate to people and actually could not come into existence unless they could prove that they serve the public good. And that was actually the litmus test that all corporations had to pass in order to come into existence in the first place, originally, and for the first 100 years in the history of this country. However, after the Civil War and after, during the robber baron era, and, which was an incredibly corrupt time, and also as capitalism was growing as the economic system and replacing, plantation slavery, those large capitalists, mostly starting with railroad barons, but moved on to, the oil and gas industry, et cetera, basically colluded to make the argument that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which says that no state can deny any person equal protection of the law. This is the amendment that was passed to ensure that states were not allowed to do exactly what they did, which was pass laws that discriminated against freed Black folks, and to try and put in place an amendment that would make what later became known as Jim Crow unconstitutional. But because the Supreme Court chose to ignore the intention of the 14th Amendment when it came to the rights of Black folks, and incidentally also women who argued, hey, these laws that states have that deny us the ability to vote are clearly a violation of the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment says no person can be denied equal protection of the law. And the Supreme Court said, no, the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to you. But the Supreme Court did say that the 14th Amendment applied to corporations. So that was how it started. And it's an interesting story, which again, Tom Hartman's book kind of lays out the best in a case called Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, which may or may not even have ever mentioned corporate constitutional rights, but it was included in the headnotes later by a court reporter who was an ex-railroad official himself. And a number of the Supreme Court justices on that case were railroad lawyers. That was their background. And that was sort of how they got the foot in the door. And then from there, we're able to gain Fourth Amendment protections, Fifth Amendment protections, and further 14th Amendment protections, and then First Amendment protections. And it continues to be expanded. And this is an ongoing legal fight that we have to, say once and for all, only human beings have constitutional rights. So good question. Bob, I hope that helped kind of give you at least the broad strokes. And again, it looks like a few folks are Ken's on YouTube too, so there are other folks who are kind of weighing in this discussion, and that's welcome and thank you. I encourage you to go to the Learn More page on Move to Amend's site and check out the materials that we have there that kind of goes into this history and then talks more about what it means when they have 14th Amendment and 5th Amendment and 4th Amendment and First Amendment rights, because we have to address all of them. All right. Looks like last call. If anybody's got any other questions, let me know. And again, if you're tuning in and you're not live, feel free to still put your questions in the comments of whichever platform you're using, and we will respond to you just as soon as we can. Keep in mind that actually all of our staff are currently in laid off mode. We had to lay off our folks at the beginning of COVID because we lost some major funding as we started into this disaster. And we're looking to bring folks back, and it looks like we're going to be able to do that pretty soon. But that means that we're a little bit short-staffed here because we are, some of us were able to kind of get other part-time gigs, and we're working as volunteers right now. That's how committed we are to this. How many other organizations do you know where this is people's jobs and they would do the work for free because they care so much and are so committed? That's what my colleagues are all about at Move to Amend. So I hope you will stand with us and work with us and join us in doing the work of building this movement further. And, you know, we're doing it because there are so many folks out there who are working at the grassroots level who are basically in the same boat. They've been working as volunteers, and they are, you know, they are doing this basically as their part-time job, even if they're retired on the side, and some people who are not retired because everyone is so dedicated. So it's a really special team of folks. All right, so the last thing that we always do is a hell yeah moment, leave you with a little bit of inspiration. First, I want to announce that our Twitter winner is DC Grease. I was about to say Diesel, but that's not it. DC Grease. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that quite right, but you win the t-shirt for Twitter. And Roberto Carrera, you win the t-shirt for Facebook. So send us a DM, let us know what size you'd like and your address, and we will get that out to you ASAP. And also, I want to invite you all to join me on Sunday at the People's Party National Convention. Alfonso will share the link. Move to Amend is nonpartisan. We work with folks in any party who support our amendment. And as such, we have worked with Republicans and Democrats and Greens and Independents and Libertarians. And now the People's Party is forming. And they have endorsed our amendment, and it is part of their platform. And that was done, you know, some months ago. And we appreciate their support in that way. And they have invited me to join as a speaker at their convention this Sunday. Of course, it's online, and I'll be speaking along with some true superstars, Nina Turner, Cornel West, Danny Glover, Chris Hedges, and a number of awesome folks. So I hope you'll join me. There's the link where you can register and check it out. That'll be on Sunday. I think it's from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. And then tune in with me next time on September 30th. Remember, this show is always on the last Wednesday of the month. And hopefully Keyan will be able to join me for the Grassroots report. And then we've got two different kind of hell yeah moments. I just wanted to do a breaking news shout out to the Milwaukee Bucks for starting an NBA Wildcat strike in support of Black lives. So the team is refusing to play their playoff game tonight. And I've seen, this was like, I just saw this right before we came on live. So I don't know the full story, but there is a news article that Alfonso will share. I've seen that the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team is also joining as well. So we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously this is the playoffs for basketball. So this is like a super, you know, there's a lot on the line for them to actually be refusing to play the game. But I think it's pretty obvious that why and it's worth it. So shout out to the Milwaukee Bucks and all the teams that join with them. And then our hell yeah moment is a video of direct action at its best. 150 plus New Yorkers protested outside Governor Cuomo's mansion. I love this tactic of going to people's homes, going to these lawmakers' homes, especially in the time of coronavirus. It is not okay that we just be confined to their offices when they're at home enjoying, premier ice cream and sort of laughing about how we all have to kind of stay inside. They don't get it. They're out of touch. And it's perfectly reasonable for us to escalate our tactics and go to their houses. So folks went to Governor Cuomo's mansion in Albany to demand he raise taxes on the ultra wealthy to ensure working class New Yorkers survive this pandemic and the economic crisis. The protests include forming a bread line, impersonating billionaire donors, interrupting the food line, saying to tax the poor and not the rich, a march with pitchforks to Governor Cuomo's office from his mansion, and to the Hamptons. I love the idea of 150 folks marching into the Hamptons with pitchforks. That just, I don't know, makes my heart feel a little fluttery. So incoming state senator Jabari Brisport was a speaker at the event, and Alfonso put together some clips of it for you for inspiration. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. I hope you stay safe. I hope everyone is doing all right. And I hope you will figure out how you can take your biggest and best action to support the movement for survival for working people in this country, because we need you right now. Thanks for being here tonight. And thanks always to Alfonso for being producer extraordinaire. Take care. And whenever you need to find us, we're at movetoamend.org. Have a good rest of your August, and we'll see you in September.
We're going to have your last the same right now. Of them hoarding so much wealth while so many of us are suffering at the bottom. Now, my name is Jabari Brisport. I'm a senator-elect in Brooklyn. I'm a democratic socialist. And I'm a public school teacher. And if there's one thing that makes me more mad than billionaires, it's billionaires like Dan Loeb that push and advocate for charter schools. I'm sick of the attacks on our public school children, and I'm sick of people like this donating to Andrew Cuomo so he can sit there in Albany twiddling his thumbs about how to deal with this budget deficit. We have cuts coming to education, to healthcare, to housing, to the environment, to too many parts of our lives, to the too many social services. Meanwhile, they're sitting here in luxury and their billion-dollar estates. Shame! Shame! There are over 100 billionaires in New York. Since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, they made over $77 billion. But you know what I think? I think that's your budget gap right there. I think we can throw that budget.
Corporations are not people too. Money is not speech. Man, in fact, it's the root of all right now. We have the right to be free. Corporations are not people too. Money is not speech. Man, in fact, it's the root of all right now. Stand up and defend your democracy.
Have you recently read the Constitution? The
seems to be some type of confusion. I thought it said the people were the institution and not the corporations that simply want to use them. The truth is currently a fusion of corporate loot and our government that is outright abusive. People need change. The state, it refuses. They're saying we're mistaken. Well, show us where the proof is. They control the media, movies, and the music, and determine where supplies of the water and food live. We need a strategy. Here is a solution.